So today I will start with a whakatauki. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tihau, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, Maori ora.
Kia ora,
And
Andrea.
the English translation is as follows: seize the winds from the west, seize the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened air, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Andrea, as some of you might know, and welcome to those who are returning, and a very warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. We are both very pleased to have you participating in this conversation. As you know, or some of you might know, this is part of a series that we have done occasionally in the past in the PSA, and it's called the Progressive Thinking Blitz, and we have done one on tax, one on housing, one on the future of work. And just before lockdown, we started planning to do another booklet on the future of public and community services. And then lockdown happened. So we couldn't publish and we couldn't run our lunchtime seminars that we often hold as part of these booklets in Wellington. So we decided to publish the chapters online on our website and to have these webinars instead. And it all evolved into a regular feature. We'll have webinars until September on a weekly basis, so watch this space. And we will also publish a booklet later in the year. It might also be around September. So you will get a hard copy if you're interested. And yeah, I will just quickly run you through how we are doing the webinar. Most of you will know. We'll have our round of introductions, and then we will ask our guests to present their thoughts and share some reflections on the topic. And yeah, after that, we'll basically have time for a conversation, for a discussion. And I would like to encourage you all to use the question and answer function for your questions, and try to keep them as short as possible. Then it's more likely that I can build them into the conversation. You're also most welcome to use the chat function, of course, but for your questions, please, the question and answer function. That would be fantastic. And also just a reminder, I mentioned it already, all of the chapters and also all of the webinars, the recordings of the webinars are available on the PSA website. So go and check them out, share them with friends and colleagues and whānau, and yeah, enjoy the conversations. But now I think we are going to start. So my guest today, I'm really thrilled. We have Deb Te Kawa. So a very warm welcome to you, Deb.
Kia ora.
And as always, we had a little chat before the webinar, and I asked you for 3 words that, you know, describe you or the conversation that we are going to have, your work. And you gave me quite extraordinary words, really. You mentioned high wire act. So please introduce yourself, Deb, and explain what or why you chose those 3 words.
Kia ora, Andrea. Ko pauhautia te maunga, ko aia puta awa, te whānau a hini autia, te whānau a pūkai, te whānau a haenga ngā hapu. Nō rangi ora a hau ko Deb Te Kawa toko ingoa. Kia ora, Andrea. High Wire Act. It's from both Amohir and I, and everyone, Dr. Amohir Bolton and I have written a paper that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. but both of us chose the idea of a high wire act. The concept being that whenever you're talking about treaty issues, whenever you're talking about Crown Māori issues, you're automatically pulled in a couple of directions, and the conversation, if done well, is one that is not without risk, sometimes is without a safety net, but can be done beautifully and elegantly from start to finish. You know, High Wire Act also speaks to being Ngāti Porou as well as being a public servant. And we talk about it in the paper being, you know, working through the lockdown, keeping an eye on whānau through the lockdown, but also doing some of the primary housekeeping duties through the lockdown. And so High Wire Act is the idea is that we're often pulled in so many directions. And this conversation that you and I are going to have today, and also the paper we've written, is one of those high wire acts.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we are in for a real treat today. So as you mentioned, you drafted the paper with Dr. Amoya Bolton, who unfortunately can't be with us today. But you will share some of your thoughts and Amohia's thoughts during the conversation. And I also love the title of your paper, which is Raising Waka and Not Just Yachts. So I would like to give you the floor and share your thoughts and reflections with us on your main ideas, and maybe also give us some questions to consider for the conversations and for our participants to think about. And then after that, you'll have around about 10 minutes. After that, we'll have a bit of a discussion. So thank you.
Look, that'd be fantastic. But please also, Andrea, jump in as you need to. If you need anything clarified, if you think I can elucidate or, you know, make something clearer, please, conversation between you and I. Hey, so forgive me, everyone. I'm just gonna, so like any academic, any policy person, we spent most of our time on our opening paragraph, which we think is a thing of beauty at the moment. So let me just return to the paper and let me read it out to you, because I think it really is the context for our advice. While the COVID-19 crisis has reminded us of how underprepared the world was to detect and respond to emerging infectious diseases, it simultaneously revealed how well placed and how effective institutions in Te Ao Māori are at being able to respond decisively and positively on behalf of their people. And so we've crafted a paper that calls attention to the way in which officials here in Wellington defaulted to rangatiratanga, stepped back from kawanatanga, and allowed around about 135 institutions Te Ao Māori, from health providers, social services providers, hapu, the whānau water commissioning agencies, to really do their best work. And so through our paper, we've called attention to that, and we've thought and said actually that the future of Māori public policy, the future of Māori service delivery, is in what we discovered over the lockdown through those particular decisions and through the extraordinarily effective work that those institutions did. We've also started the paper with some, they might be a little bit controversial ideas, but I think they're important for us to talk about. And this is where the concept of raising waka and not just yachts comes from, is we've trawled the research. We've trawled the research into what's happened in previous pandemics. And overwhelmingly, we discover that previous pandemics have actually created inequality and have actually created intergenerational inequality. We've also gone back to the work of Vera Keith and Paparangi Reid, when after the 1980s reforms, they worked with a community in Whakatū in the Hawke's Bay, and they examined the health of people who'd been made involuntary redundant, so had been laid off and lost their jobs. And they tracked them over time and found a causation, so not just a correlation, but a causation between mental health outcomes and losing jobs. So we just reminded ourselves of that research. And then we had a look at some work that Tokana Taraki have just published with Burl, which is looking at and starting to forecast the impact of the lockdown, the impact of the pandemic on Māori and on the Māori economy and on particular sectors. And hey, everyone, the paper will be online soon. We've put the references in the paper so you can click through and read this work yourself. I recommend Paparangi Reid's work, and I recommend the work of Tokana Taraki and Burl, because it gives us a sense of a generation that will be disrupted, vulnerable groups who will be left vulnerable if we don't build really big shields for the long term. And then what we do in the paper is we talk about what worked, we talk about things that needed to be attended to right now. What we've suggested there is that the place of whānau water navigators and Māori health workers, that their place in the public health system is made concrete, and that that's matched with remuneration. What we've also said that people need to stop doing is, let's stop pretending that somehow we're all in this together. Like, I for one love the idea of the team of 5 million. So does Amo here. But we can't ignore or silence the fact that the pandemic will be unequally experienced. And then we finish the paper, as I think, Andre, you've read, is we finish the paper with a challenge to Wellington officials to both take account of the Waitangi Tribunal findings from the Health Outcomes Report, the last review into the whānau water commissioning agencies, and to start implementing them at scale. And then also a last challenge, because again, it's a high wire act, a last challenge actually is for senior officials to set about decolonising the institutions. We're 20 years out from the 200-year signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. It's time for us to attend to the decolonisation of our public institutions. And some agencies are on this path now, and we propose that it's time for everyone to start the journey. So Andrea, my friend, that is our paper, and we'd welcome people engaging in it. And hopefully, what we've also done is to be able to assemble some resources that other people can access and also use for themselves.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's get down to the detail and dig a little bit deeper, I guess. I would be really keen to hear about the idea of the specific recovery shields. You mentioned it in your little summary, and you said it's really important to have these recovery shields, particularly for vulnerable groups in society, and that these recovery shields should become the new normal, actually. We need to have them in place long term. And maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit and tell us why and how that would look like.
Yeah, thank you. So starting with that first assumption that previous pandemics actually create inequality, and that inequality has been intergenerational, is we crashed together, Amohir and I crashed together that assumption with 3 other big ideas. And the first big idea actually came from Bob Buckle and Douglas and Zero at the Treasury in 2006, is they prepared a paper analysing the impacts of a potential influenza in Aotearoa, and they gave us a set of stages. And the first stage is anticipatory. It's when you're starting to consider how to respond to like a COVID event. The next one is impact, is when you're starting to see the impact of it on the economy and on a community. And then the next large phase, phase number three, is when you're starting to prepare for recovery. But what they also make clear in the paper, that the bigger stage is the long-term impact. And what they also hint at the paper, and this is where we've used their staged approach, is that a lot of work needs to be done in the impact stage and the recovery stage to mitigate against the harm of, you know, intergenerational inequality in the long-term stage. So we've borrowed from their stages approach. We've also grabbed this idea of shields. So this is the second idea. And again, you know, our essential services and our public health officials and, you know, our friends at the Ministry of Health did an extraordinary job through the lockdown. And if, like me, you would listen into the daily cast on where we're at, we would often hear about the concepts of PPP, the concepts of shields. And so we've grabbed that idea of shield and said, you can think about public policy as shields. Yeah, you can think about the lockdown approach, the levels, the choices that the Ministry of Health have made. They're public health shields. And our invitation in the paper is for people to think about economic and social development choices as shields. The wage subsidy is a shield. And then the third idea we've crashed in there is whānau ora. Whānau ora is a shield. It is a protection mechanism that enables whānau to live as whānau. It enables whānau to be self-sufficient, to be sovereign, to develop as they wish, you know, against the 7 po that the whānau ora commissioning agencies work against. So that's kind of what we're saying. If you think about the new normal, surely public policy right at the moment is your ability to create these shields in exactly the same way our friends at the Ministry of Health did. Shields for the economy, and then also shields that do not create the intergenerational inequality that pandemics normally give us. And so that's what that idea is in the paper, Andrea. And of course, and I'll jump there now, it is our suggestion that whānau-centred approaches to public policy and whānau ora delivery models are probably the most easily available shields we've got right now, together with the work that those iwi and Māori social service providers did through the lockdown.
Thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the whānau ora approach. You mentioned the, you know, the inquiry into Maori health inequities, and we also just received the final report on the health and disability system review from Heather Simpson. So, you know, there are lots of recommendations there around creating greater access and equality of outcomes, I guess, for people in general. And I think that comes at the same time as we are having discussions about the need to move beyond isolated services and to consider social determinants and the wider communities that people are living in order to create the health outcomes that we need. And I think this is where whānau ora comes into the picture, right? And I would be interested if actually a whānau ora approach would actually lift all our health aspirations, if you like, to a different level, and would make our system operate in a more effective way rather than individualized, isolated services. And for me, the question is would New Zealand be ready for that? Or what would it take to make New Zealand ready for a whānau ora approach that is actually applicable beyond a focus on Maori?
It is so many, Andrea, so many ideas in that. No. So, and I'm grappling with everyone. Which one should I hook into? Because they're all great. It's a great question. I'm going to start. Where should I start with it? So firstly, keep in mind that whānau ora doesn't just deliver to Māori. Yeah, we have our Pacifica commissioning agency. So I don't think about it as necessarily a Māori thing, even though the ontology absolutely is. Let me start back. Which is because, you know, public policy person.
We have plenty of time.
Yeah. I think what is our country ready for public services that are easily accessible, that are equitable, and that create equity of opportunity and outcome? I think we've been ready for some time. The barrier to that, though, is the question, which is why in the paper we propose, you know, the institutions, it really is time to decolonize. It's time to value other ways of knowing, other ways of being, other ways of organizing oneself. So that's the first answer to that question from the paper. But I think there's a question about why is it that every 5 years where we get reports on how public sector is so fragmented and service delivery is so not integrated. I think why is it that we keep asking and trying to answer these questions, but it doesn't change? The whānau ora model just cuts through that. It works around it. It uses its navigator workforce to join everyone up. Now, I need to be clear. I'm not saying that whānau ora is the other way. There are some services, if I just think up in the north, some, you know, Ngāpoi social services use their own approach. It's not necessarily a whānau ora approach. But what they do is they just make the services accessible. They make them easy to interact and use. They make them holistic. They ensure equity of outcome. They allow people to confidently participate in te ao Māori while being nurturing and cohesive. I'm hoping that answers the question, and it's such a big question. I'm hoping that goes some way to it. The answer is yes. The country is ready for those sort of services. It's maybe, and we've also hinted at the paper, I think that's what the new normal could be.
And I think you're mentioning in the paper, and we've seen that during the lockdown, that there was a sense of urgency and, you know, a shared mission and, you know, to a certain degree, local decision making as well. And you're saying that all those three elements, they help the implementation. So what are your suggestions to carry that forward, to maintain that sense of urgency? Because that's what we need, right? To really make things happen.
It's a really interesting feature of our public management system, and we see it over and over again. And again, this is the need to decolonize, to make it not the Westminster system, but the Aotearoa system. Our system is incredibly responsive to the short term. If you think about our first responders in Christchurch, if you think about our first responders and our essential workers in COVID, is that we have a great many, we're lucky in our system to have a great many professions and professionals who just do the right thing and are trained to do the right thing with urgency, to respond to the immediate. And we also have a public management system that's kind of short term. We try to get people to think in 4-year cycles. But I was talking with a friend this morning, actually. There are tribes in Alaska who think in 1,000-year timeframes. Our friends in Kaita who think in 200-year timeframes. And so I'm not dissing this, I'm not whakahihing or being shill about this. The ability to respond with urgency and speed is both a strong feature of our public management system as well as a bit of a weakness, because the strength in being able to respond with urgently displaces the medium to long term. And so the question you've asked is exactly the right question. in what we've said in our paper is, can we grab everything that was good through the lockdown? You know, the Crown stepping back and asking the 135 iwi social services and Māori providers to do the lifting for rural whānau, for kaumātua, for people who are homeless. Because the Crown accepted, right, that it hadn't delivered services to them, was unwilling or unable, who knows. So Kawanatanga stepped back and said, look, please do your very best. And they did. And they did. And so what we're saying is, given we have a system that has a tendency towards the short term, is it possible now we could just scale up the services that those agencies provide, and then just ask them to do this work and to keep doing this work for the next 20 odd years, you know, beyond the usual political cycles. So that is, you know, and we've suggested that in the paper, is to stop kind of, we didn't quite say it like this because it's a tightrope, right? It's a high wire act. But, you know, I can say it now, is we've kind of said stop politicizing these issues. You know, they're not Māori Party, Labour Party or national issues. These are not political issues. This is just good service delivery. It's just good public policy. So could we now concretize this and make it a permanent, enduring part of the public management landscape is what we're asking.
I think you will be familiar with the new Public Service Act that you know, will be passed soon, hopefully. And in that act, it provides for agency to produce more longer-term analysis. Do you think that will help, or is it just a first step? Or how do we make most of that provision to actually achieve the outcomes that we want to achieve?
Such a great question. That one is, I'd probably defer to Jonathan Boston on that, because he had some strong words to offer the select committee on those. I think he might have said, and I'm not putting words into his mouth, like, I think it's a good thing that the service is required to produce these kind of long-term plans. I think he may have challenged them on, well, what's the content? You know, will we see free and frank advice in there? Will we see contestable advice in there? You know, for my part, is I would love to see what Te Arawhiti and our friends at Te Puni Kōkiri come up with. And I hope it is in the domain of free and frank advice. And I hope it is in the domain of challenge, and that it is in serving in the public interest, not in ministerial or political or the political executive's interest. So to answer your question, I think it's a great's too strong. I think it's an interesting evolution. It is overdue, and we will be tested the first time that they land.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to move on to another topic that you're also covering. It is a question that we got from our audience here about the different institutions in the public service, and you know, some of them have been in the process of decolonization, and you know, have kind of been more open and acquired a different view on which knowledge is valuable. You're touching on that on your in your paper as well. Can you give us a few examples of which institutions you think have adopted, you know, or challenged a colonizing kind of view of the world, and which ones are probably having a little bit of more work to do really in the future?
I can only, so let's start with what I think decolonization is, right? It's the thinking and the mahi that goes on to challenge the prevailing ideology, to challenge, in our case, settler ideology and thinking, and to check that actually, no, I'm not going to say check, actually to dismantle those structures that don't assist us. So that's on one hand. And on the other hand, it's also the promotion and the valuing, in our case, of Indigenous, of Māori ways of knowing things. So that for me is what decolonisation looks like. I think it's a really important IP set. I'm not going to comment on who's doing it poorly. Others can do that. There are reports about that. There are a number of reports about a couple of institutions on that. But I'm just going to offer some people some insight into a couple of agencies that I know and how it really changes the way they think. I'm going to start with one that I know quite well, Wakakotahi, so the New Zealand Transport Agency. You know, their regulatory side was in trouble, basically. It had failed to ensure that vehicles were safe, you know, and a person died. So they've been on a path to re-look at themselves about how they understand their system and how they be a regulator. They've done it from a set of Māori concepts. The big organising concept is kaitiatitanga, that there is a system, that they have a responsibility of a system, and their job is to ensure the system is a good system both now and to the future. So they're trying to push through that short term. They've also chosen the concept of tikapono, which is the idea that, you know, they will be unafraid to work in the public interest, which is in the interest of safety. And there's another idea that is playing inside this strategy called manakitanga, and how this plays out practically is they don't look at their system as a way to just improve safety by making sure this car's this and this car's that. Is they're thinking about the people who are using the land transport network as taking care of one another. Is you keeping your car safe or you keeping your driving skills up to a certain point is because you acknowledge that you're one of many in a community of people who is on the roads. And so that's just a very small insight, I think, into how profoundly Indigenous and Māori ways of thinking can transform the way that we understand public management, the way that we understand service delivery. The second example I just want to draw people's attention to, because I think it's profound, is Arapōtama, our Department of Corrections. You know, this is an institution that used to think of itself as prisons and parole. They've got a strategy called hokairangi, which I recommend to everyone. But it's more than that. They've designed their operating model around their strategy. And so they just don't, they've got a concept called whakawhanaungatanga. And so now when they think about themselves, they don't just think about prisons and parole. They think, okay, on day one, we get the care of this person, and this person has a family. And if we keep this person connected to their wider whānau, actually that makes that entire journey much easier. Again, that's a really profound transformation in the way we think about our corrections institution. And so those are the sort of things that we're talking about. You know, there are agencies that are just at the start of this. Oh, the last one I'd call your attention to, and I'm just still trying to understand it. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, has come up with a mātauranga Māori framework to understanding care and protection of the environment. It's new, right? In 20 years' time, we'll go, oh, what was that? But again, you're seeing people leading. You're seeing them stepping out. You're seeing them question their old ways of knowing and starting to pivot their organisation to local ways of knowing and acting. I hope that answers the question.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And it made me think about the Ngā principles that the Te Runanga at the PSA developed, and manakitanga is one of them. And I think it actually underlines the commitment to te tiriti in this context for the PSA, but also of other public service institutions, and also supports a greater unity and strength of Maori in the workplace, and in our case of Maori members. And this is an interest, I guess, that I have as a PSA member myself, but also a person employed by the PSA, and being dedicated to the union movement as such. What do you think can unions or the union movement do to effectively take needs and aspirations of Maori on board? And what do you think we need to change in order to support Maori in the workplace, and in this case, in the public and community services?
It's a great question. I'm going to answer it with a little bit of like an extreme. And forgive me, remember this is tightrope walking. So it's going to feel a little challenging for some. It is. So beyond what we would say is, you know, start the process of decolonisation, look at those things that, and dismantle those things that privilege one thing over another that don't work for us locally. And where you can, value and revitalise Māori and Indigenous ways of knowing. That's it, please, that's a given, it's in our paper. What's not in our paper is, and I would say this quietly, so let's just pretend it's me and you talking. At one extreme, in many institutions we have, and I do mean many, is they see their Māori staff as dāla pōhere or dāla karakia. Now, I have no problem with that if that's what those individuals want to do. At the other extreme, we will often see, I'm not saying more, but we'll often see people who are not Māori having a Māori experience and suddenly being pro-Māori everything and displacing Māori people's being in the workplace. And I think all of our jobs is to find the middle ground in there. I'm going to come to this other point in a moment. No, I'm going to come to it now. One of the things that is both, that I think is really exciting about where we are as a community is that our KKW kids are coming through now, right? Our kohanga, kura and wānanga kids. And they are extraordinary. It is, I love working with rangatahi Māori. They are extraordinary human beings. And I just think if the public service wants to have access to these, I think of them as taonga, if they want access to these kids, if they want them to join and have the experience of being a public servant, which I think is a very privileged, but also they're a proud position of Māori public servants, then they've got to think their way through those two extremes. How Pākehā people don't displace Māori people in the workplace, but not just doing dāla pōhere. I do a little bit of diversity and inclusion work. You know, I do a lot of work with boards, and I do most of my work's around inclusion. Having got diverse staff on, what are you doing to include them in the decision making? What are you doing to make sure their voice is heard inside your institution? And so, you know, and that goes to the heart of some of the ways we behave in meetings, some of the ways we invite people to participate, some of the ways that we just listen instead of talk. I hope that answers the question. There's three quite big ideas in there, from, you know, meeting hygiene to some of the extremes in the way that people take care of the Māori workforce, to decolonising the institutions that Māori are in. Three quite big ideas to a very big question, Andrea.
I think it links well, though, to something that, you know, you are discussing in the paper as well, and that's the competencies and skills that, you know, the public servant of the future needs to bring.
Yeah.
And you know, can you give us maybe like 3 core competencies I mean, if you want to choose 5, that's fine too. But just something that, you know, we can take away and share with our friends in whānau as well as our colleagues. What do you think those core competencies and skills of public servants could be?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question that I'm not quite ready for. I'm gonna call one out. It's one competency, if that's all right, and it's a thing that we all call and know as cultural competency. And the reason I'm being a bit kind of reticent and nervous about it is that cultural competency has been around for a long time. I just think of the work that some people who are listening will know. Irihāpiti Ramsden started this work in nursing 40 years ago. So it's an idea that's been with us for a long time. But I'm pleased right now that it started to move, particularly in health, with the medical council, and I can't quite remember, but people like David Tiffany Leach, I think it's the Te Ohurata o Aotearoa, the Māori medical practitioners. I think they've been working together with the Ministry of Health to describe what cultural competency is. So it's not a checklist anymore. It's a very simple idea that one can be both effective as a professional and respectful in all of the cultural contexts that professional has to operate. As we're an increasingly more diverse society. And I just think cultural competency is your ability to be your technical self and to be deeply respectful of the culture that you are then working in, whether or not that is Māori, Pasifika, whatever. And I'd love to see more of that, because I'm going to be not quite sure this is the way. I don't see a lot of it anymore. And so anyway, and I shall provide you the link to that work, because I think it's very good work as well.
That would be great. And I think it really goes back to, you know, what you said early on in the discussion, is the importance of listening and the importance of having conversations and having brave conversations, actually, and being open to that. I think it really comes down to that. That's how we learn, right? That's how we engage with each other, and that's how we show respect for each other and their experiences and their ideas and cultural background as well. So
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It seems really simple when we say it like that.
It does. It does. But yeah, we all know how tricky it can be. But the good news is we can all, I think, try, and we can, and the more we do it collectively, the more impact we will have. Yeah. So we don't have to wait until tomorrow or until some policy comes about. I think that is something that we can all do together right from this moment.
Yeah, I think so, Andrea. I think so. I think that, you know, just to add, I think we might have said somewhere in the paper, though, is that not underestimating the power of senior officials in this, you know, for our members, not underestimating the power of managers in this. When they signal that this stuff is appropriate and okay and is expected, it happens. And when they don't signal it, or they're uncomfortable with it, then again they displace those expressions. So we've said something in the paper. We've given a bit of a challenge, a bit of a wheel to senior officials, that we need them to role model this stuff. It lies with them both now and into the future.
Thank you so much. This was, you know, really inspiring. I learned a lot. I hope the audience took quite a bit away as well, but I'm sure they did. And just a reminder again, everyone, the paper will be accessible through the PSA website, so you can have a read of the really beautifully crafted paper. The paper also includes, as Deb has mentioned, all of the different references that she used in our conversation, so you can have a wider look at all the other research that is out there. And I would just like to make you all aware of our next webinar, which is on the 29th of July. So next Wednesday, we are going to talk to Tracy Bridges about social marketing in the state. So that should be another interesting one. And I hope you can all join us. And yeah, I will just say thank you and stay well, and close with another whakatauki, which is the following. No te rauro, naku te rauro, ka ora ai te iwi. With your basket and my basket, the people will live. So thank you so much, Deb, for the conversation.
Pleasure, pleasure. Kia ora.